Today's featured speaker is Andrew Ginter, VP of Industrial Security at Waterfall Security Solutions. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenter, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Andrew.
Thank you, Jessica. And my thanks to everyone who's joining us for tuning in. At Waterfall, we are the OT security company, and I'm going to be talking about OT security monitoring. And the first question I'm going to speak to is safety. I mean, at Waterfall, we focus on securing OT networks, industrial networks in industrial enterprises, enterprises with important physical operations. And as a result, we work with a lot of engineering teams. And lately, we've been working with a lot of enterprise security teams as well. I'll say more about that. What we've observed in these interactions is that enterprise teams are often surprised by what they find in operations. I mean, the highest security priority on most enterprise networks is protect the information. The highest cybersecurity priority in operations is generally never protect the information, not the confidentiality, the integrity, the availability. It's not about the information. The highest priority is safety, physical safety. I mean, whenever anybody, it doesn't matter who it is, when anybody asks for any change to an industrial network, the first question that engineering teams always ask is, how likely is it that this change will kill somebody? This may sound extreme, but in a sense, it's really not surprising. This is the job of engineering. All powerful tools are also weapons. Physical industrial processes are very powerful tools. And engineers' first priority is to make sure that we are very careful with these very powerful tools. And the answer that the engineers get is never, this change is completely safe. Nothing is completely safe. Engineers work with probabilities, not with absolutes. So, once the safety question has been investigated and has been answered with a high enough degree of confidence, the next question we have to expect, and it always comes, the next question is, how likely is it that this change, be it a security change or any other operational change, how likely is it that this change will damage our very expensive physical equipment, our turbines, our pumps, our catalytic cracking towers? And when that question has been investigated and answered, we have to expect a third question. The question is always, how likely is this change to trip our plant, to cause an unplanned shutdown? Emergency shutdowns are generally very expensive. It can take days or even weeks to come back to full production after emergency shutdown. This is not at all unusual. And in a great many cases, an emergency shutdown runs a real risk of damaging the physical equipment. So the priority for cybersecurity at pretty much every industrial site I've ever seen is not protecting the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of information. The top security priority on OT networks is assuring safe, correct, continuous, and efficient physical operations. Now, up until about 2017, 2018, these differences in priorities were largely academic. This is because at most of the sites I worked with, enterprise security teams were really not engaged in the process of securing OT networks. There were rare exceptions, but by and large, that was the case. In the last 2 years, though, this has changed sharply. Today, at a large fraction of the industrial sites that we engage with, enterprise security teams are leading OT security initiatives. And so enterprise and OT teams, for the first time in the last couple of years, really do need to understand each other, today more so than ever, so that we can all work together and you know, get the job done security-wise. So what does this mean in practice? In practice, most often, the first thing that we see that enterprise security teams work to accomplish is to bring OT networks into the enterprise security, the monitoring program, the security monitoring program. You know, this is because security monitoring and intrusion detection are vital. The first law of cybersecurity is that nothing is secure. It doesn't matter how secure we are, something can always still get in. And so, you know, just as importantly, if we want to do security at all, it's not just that, you know, we need to be watching for people getting in. We need to understand what we're working with. We need to see an inventory of computers and controllers and firewalls and whatnot that we're running. We need to know what operating systems are in all of those assets. You know, we need to find out how far behind the curve patch-wise we are on each of these assets. We need to know, you know, who's got anti-malware running and who doesn't. All of this is security monitoring. It's all wrapped up in the security monitoring program umbrella. Now, on enterprise networks, security monitoring is a mature discipline. We have intrusion detection systems to tell us about attacks in progress. You know, we have asset management and policy management and compliance management systems to inventory our assets and to figure out how secure they are. We have security information and event management systems to aggregate logs from you know, intrusion detection systems, to aggregate logs from other systems, to correlate the logs. You know, these SEMs, they figure out what constitutes dangerous conditions in the enterprise. They raise alarms, they manage the alarms. We have SOAR systems, security orchestration and automation systems, so we can manage incident response and investigations and you know, manage the alarms as they come in. And all of these systems, you know, like I said, they're mature. They carry out cross-site correlations or correlations across multiple sites. They correlate with global threat intelligence. This is a mature discipline that, you know, generally speaking, in the businesses that we work with, this discipline has visibility into essentially all of the enterprise network, except operations. This is unacceptable. This is why we see the focus on bringing operations networks into the security monitoring fold. But there's a problem. The problem with monitoring operations networks for security, for anything, you know, the problem is the third law of cybersecurity. All cyber attacks are information. This is what cyber means. Cyber attacks are information, and every piece of information can encode an attack. So to enable monitoring of operations networks, we need to enable connectivity into the networks that we're monitoring. Connectivity from a central security operations center, sometimes connectivity from a cloud-based outsourced SOC, across the internet. So there's a conflict here in terms of the NIST framework. You know, this is a conflict between the protect function and the detect function in the framework. We need to enable detection, but to enable detection, we have to enable connectivity, which introduces new attack opportunities and so impairs our protective security posture. How do we fix this? Well, there is a general solution, but let me start with a specific scenario. The first step towards OT security monitoring that we see in a lot of enterprises, the first step is the deployment of OT network intrusion detection sensors, you know, network IDS sensors. In part, this is because these sensors are sold, you know, they're advertised as being entirely passive. We can connect these sensors to mirror ports, on managed switches. The sensors get a copy of all of the network traffic. They don't participate in the OT network. They're just watching. They get a copy of the traffic so they can inspect the traffic. They can raise alarms when they see anomalies or when they see attacks in progress. The sensors are sold as being entirely passive. And this is a powerful reassurance to the engineering teams, who are asking, what's this change you're proposing? What's it going to do to safe, correct, continuous, efficient operations? But there's a problem. Every IDS sensor has at least 2 network ports. At least one of the ports connect to a mirror port so they can see a copy of all of the packets on the industrial network. And all of these sensors have at least one more conventional network port. This is the port that sends alarms to the SIMs. This is the port that the SOC analysts log into in order to manage the sensor software. And generally, these sensors need regular management. Why? Well, it's because every one of these sensors can be tuned. They can be more sensitive or they can be less sensitive. Now, if we make the sensors more sensitive, we are almost certainly going to see more false alarms, but we are less likely to miss real attacks. If we make the sensors less sensitive, now we have fewer false alarms. We have less noise, but there's a bigger chance that we have made the sensors so insensitive that they raise no alarms at all when a real attack is in progress. It's a trade-off that we make between false positives, which are false alarms, and false negatives, which are missing real attacks. And since nobody wants to miss real attacks, what most sites do is they tune the sensor to be just a little bit too noisy, to produce just a few false alarms, which means that on a regular basis, our SOC analysts need to log into the sensor and say, hey, that stuff you've been alarming about for the last 2 days, stop that. That's actually normal. And they'll do other bits of tuning as well. Some sensors need new signatures regularly. Others need updates of threat intelligence. Others need, the occasional bit of human augmentation of their machine learning algorithms. So the key question is, where do we connect that management port? Do we connect it to the OT network? Well, this is what I've got illustrated in the diagram. If we try to connect the management port to the OT network, engineering is going to push back. Engineering is going to ask us, you want how many people from where to be logging into every one of our dozens or sometimes even hundreds of OT networks, coming across the internet into those networks? And what are they doing on our networks? And what are they doing it to? These industrial networks are very important to the people who work every day inside, the zone of, very difficult industrial incidents. In having dozens of non-engineers able to log into every one of these networks whenever they feel like it, that's going to be a very tough sell. But if we connect the management port on these sensors into the enterprise network, where the SOC analysts can get to those ports easily, well, now we have a different problem. Now all these IDS sensors are dual-homed hosts. Every sensor has a network port on the enterprise network, and it has a network port connected to the OT network, to the switches, in parallel with all of our firewalls. A moderately sophisticated attacker could steal credentials or exploit a vulnerability in the sensor, could get into the sensor, and could pivot their attack into the industrial network through the mirror port. But we might ask, but these mirror ports, these are not real switch ports, are they? There's really no risk of connecting sensors to these ports, is there? We might ask, but we would be mistaken. if we look at the documentation for managed network switches, the documentation is notoriously misleading about these mirror ports. Half of the switches out there that I researched, their documentation said nothing at all about how the mirror port behaved when we presented with incoming network packets. The rest of them, pretty much all of the mirror ports are able to receive information and send it into the switch. Some of the documentation even said nothing can get back into the switch through the mirror port, and I kid you not, 2 paragraphs later said, oh, but stuff can get back in. Other manuals describe software configurations that we can enable or disable about stuff getting back into our networks through the mirror port. Steal the password to the managed switch, reconfigure the mirror port to be bidirectional, and bang, it's bidirectional. If this happened maliciously, or if it even happened by accident, how could we tell that we'd configured the switch wrong? How would we know that we're exposed until we're breached? And, you might ask, why? Why would any switch ever be so foolish as to allow anything back in through the mirror port? Well, it's because a lot of enterprise class intrusion detection sensors are not just intrusion detection sensors. They're also intrusion prevention systems, meaning, if those sensors detect an attack in progress, well, they can be configured to automatically interrupt that attack. How would they do that? They would send messages back into the mirror port. Messages like TCP reject packets that would interrupt the TCP connection that they see the attack in progress, the connection they see the attack on. So if we deploy our sensor entirely on the OT network, we have a problem with SOC analysts coming into all of our OT networks. But if we deploy it on the IT network, where the SOC analysts can get in easily, we have a problem with attacks pivoting through those sensors back into our industrial networks. Both of these approaches, both these alternatives, increase the attack surface for operations rather than reducing it. We have to fix this. How do we do that? Well, people have been coming to us at Waterfall asking us how to solve this problem for some time. In response, about last November, we came out with a new product, our Waterfall for Intrusion Detection Systems. You can see it illustrated in the middle of the diagram. Waterfall for IDS enables safe monitoring of industrial networks for this new generation, because there's a lot of new OT intrusion detection sensors out there. So we enable safe monitoring of OT networks for this new generation of sensors. So, how does it work? Well, in the diagram, we have the industrial networks on the left, we have the network switches, the mirror ports come into an optional aggregator, if you like. These ports come into the Waterfall for IDS product. The product is a variation of our standard unidirectional security gateway, the one we've been selling for over a decade. The technology is physically able to send information in only one direction. It's physically able to move information from the mirror ports into an OT IDS sensor, a sensor that's deployed on the enterprise network, so that the sensor can see, all of the OT packets. And the management port on the sensor, that management port's connected to the enterprise network where our SOC analysts can get to it easily. The Waterfall for IDS is truly passive. There is no CPU on the network side of the sensor. There's no CPU that might get it into its head to, send a packet back into the mirror port. And pivoting an attack through the enterprise network, through the OT sensor, is now physically impossible. You might ask, physically impossible? How is something physically impossible? Well, the unidirectional hardware that's illustrated here has 2 circuit boards inside it. One board has a fiber optic transmitter in it, a laser. The other circuit board has a fiber optic receiver. And there's a short piece of fiber that connects the 2 boards. So we can send stuff from the mirror port out to the sensor, but it's not physically possible to send anything back. The receiving circuit board on the right it has no laser in it. It has no transmitter. It's a pure receiver. The sending circuit board has no receiver. It's a pure transmitter. You know, the transmitter cannot even tell if the receiving circuit board has power. Absolutely nothing gets back. So if no information gets back, no attacks can get back. Now, I'm guessing some of you in the audience are already familiar with you know, the unidirectional gateway technology. You know, you might ask, just a minute, that doesn't actually sound like a new product. It kind of sounds like what you've been selling for over a decade. In what sense is this new? And you're right. You know, we have seen industrial sites deploying this kind of solution with our standard products sporadically for many years. But as I said, in about the last 2 years, this concept of bringing industrial networks into the fold, into the security monitoring fold in the enterprise, you know, this practice has really taken off. A standard unidirectional gateway, which I'll get to in a minute, a standard gateway has a host on the inside of the network and a host on the outside of the network. In this specific application, though, when we're emulating mirror ports unidirectionally out to enterprise sensors, OT IDS sensors, well, the host on the inside really does not add a lot of value. So we modified the product so that the mirror ports could be connected directly to the transmitting hardware, which is connected, you know, with the fiber optic cable directly to the receiving hardware, which is connected directly to the IDS sensor. Now, there is an optional host on the enterprise side of the Waterfall device. If you want it, you know, that host will do statistics, it'll do aggregation, it'll do reporting for you. But there's zero new hosts on the industrial network. Why is that important? Well, you know, these were the customers that came to us. Some industrial networks, nobody really cares. Another host is another host. But for some of these networks, every new host costs an enormous amount of money and effort. And, you know, this is if we're working in a regulated environment, you know, a NERC SIP environment or, you know, an ANSI environment over in France. If we're talking an OT network, you know, where we have really strict sort of safety-based engineering change controls in place, in all of these circumstances, every host has to be managed. Every host has to be manually managed, really quite aggressively. Managed, documented, inspected. It's an extremely costly effort, every new host that comes in. So we said, fine, no new hosts. You know, so dropping the host is what customers asked for, so we did it. You know, this is a product that's now customized to the needs of this new class of you know, OT intrusion detection sensors. So that is a very specific scenario. The more general security monitoring scenario, you know, you look at it and you say, well, look, intrusion detection is only the first piece of the puzzle, the first piece of the OT security monitoring program. What else is there? Well, there's the obvious. I mean, SEMS want syslog, they want SNMP. What may not be obvious is that there's a whole new generation of OT-aware SEMS that are being deployed. These SEMS are going to want to correlate what's happening in the physical process with what's happening cyber-wise. So for example, let's say the SEM discovers that a bunch of temperature values in a vat are much higher than usual. You know, at the same time that there is suspicious activity on a host, you know, that the intrusion detection system has noticed, and this is the host that's connected to the burner, to the heater for the vat. Well, OT-aware SEMS can correlate all this. They can say, whoa, something very strange is going on over there. To enable that, though, we need a fairly deep visibility into the OT networks and the OT data. You know, more than just visibility into OT network traffic. So how are we going to give our internet-based outsourced SOC, how are we going to give that system way across the internet, how are we going to give that system access to all of our OT data without introducing even more communication paths and even more attack surface deep into our OT networks. Well, this is where the standard unidirectional gateway comes in. You know, this is the technology that Waterfall introduced to the industrial world in 2007. Now, real quickly, for anyone who's not familiar with the technology, NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, defines a unidirectional gateway as a combination of hardware and software. The hardware is physically able to send in only one direction, and the software replicates servers. So the hardware we saw already. What's this about software? Well, take an example. Let's say we have a historian database or a SQL server database or an OPC server here on the left side on the industrial network. This is a common network design. You know, this kind of system, a database or an OPC server, this kind of system tends to be the focus of IT/OT integration. These systems generally have all the data in them that we want to share, that we're willing to share with the SOC and, you know, with the rest of the enterprise for that matter. So let's say we have one of these systems, one of these servers on the left here, the software part of the unidirectional gateway. I mean, in the diagram here, everything inside the red is the unidirectional gateway. It's usually packaged as a single 1U device, but it's called out here in 4 pieces to make it clear that there's software on both sides, and then there's the unidirectional hardware in the middle. So let's say we have one of these systems. The software on the industrial side of the gateway logs into the data source. You know, nothing tricky, username and password. And the software asks for all of the latest real-time data. The software converts that data into you know, the weird one-way protocols that have to go through the one-way hardware, and the software sends the data to the hardware. The software on the receiving side gets the data and logs into an identical server. So, you know, if it's a Pi historian on the inside, it's Pi on the outside. If it's a Oracle on the inside, it's Oracle on the outside. The software logs in and updates the enterprise server. What this means is that now anybody on the outside, like the SOC, like the SAM, anybody who really wants the very latest industrial data, they can ask the replica for the data, and they get the same answer as the live server would have given. They get that answer without ever sending their query through to the live server. That, you know, a query that might put the industrial network at risk. Nothing goes back through the gateway. And it's not just Oracle and Pi and OPC we do this for. You know, Waterfall invented this application of unidirectional technology, the application of the technology to industrial networks. And so we have the world's largest connection of off-the-shelf industrial server replication software. We can replicate syslog and SNMP, of course. You know, we can replicate policy managers. We can replicate all the kinds of information that are indicative of the state of security on an industrial network. When enterprise security teams deploy this solution, you know, their what's the right word? Their value prop to operations is that we introduce no new connectivity to operations networks. No new connectivity from the enterprise network, no new connectivity from the internet. Security is important. There is no safety without security. There's no reliability without security. If we want to optimize security, we have to measure security. We can only optimize what we measure. This is an argument that is crystal clear to engineers in operations. You know, this is how to persuade engineering to embrace the new security initiatives. So let's start measuring security safely so that we can optimize it. And it's not just me saying this, it's not just Waterfall saying this. You know, we have partners in this space who are saying the same thing. We have a strategic partnership with FireEye. Travis Reese, the former president of FireEye, is the chairman of Waterfall's board of directors. Matthew Schoenfield, most recently the division manager for FireEye's North American business unit. You know, Matthew has just joined Waterfall's strategic advisory board. FireEye salespeople get quota credit when they sell Waterfall technology. You know, we work shoulder to shoulder with with FireEye people going into industrial sites and enabling safe OT security monitoring. We have other partners. Most of these are leaders in the OT intrusion detection space. They're leaders in the OT SEM space. These partners are all saying the same thing. They're saying if we have a site where operations is saying, you know, I just don't know about this trade-off between protection and detection, you know, it just feels wrong. If you're getting that kind of pushback from operations, bring in Waterfall. The pushback disappears. We can deploy a solution that lets us detect intrusions and monitor security without any change to the protective posture, zero change to the attack surface. So if you're interested in more detail on this, we have a white paper out. It's called the Gold Standard for OT Security Monitoring. It talks about this approach, this unidirectional approach for OT monitoring. Paper's available on the Waterfall website, waterfall-security.com/gold-standard. You know, and the bottom line in the white paper is you know, roughly what I've said already. If we put at least one layer of unidirectional protection somewhere between the IT and the OT networks, now we can safely monitor industrial operations from our enterprise networks, from our SOC, from the outsourced SOC, you know, from cloud vendors for that matter, who are doing big data analysis. We can safely monitor operations from the internet, you know, without risk to operations. Another resource, if you're interested in the industrial security space, Waterfall sponsors the Industrial Security Podcast. I am one of the co-hosts. Waterfall sponsors the podcast as a public service. The podcast is not about us. The podcast is about industrial security. Now, if you're not a podcast person, I suggest try it out. I mean, I was not a podcast person until I started hosting this show. And, you know, then I discovered that, well, shoot, if I have a dead hour somewhere where I'm cycling or I'm, you know, driving or I'm doing something routine, I can turn on a podcast. There's lots of good podcasts out there. I can turn on a podcast and I can learn something as I do my routine stuff. And if you figured this out already long before I did, just go to your favorite podcast app and search for industrial security. We do have a different guest on the show every week. Again, it's not about us. We have a different guest every week. It's all about the guest, a guest who's talking about what's important to them, a guest who's providing value to the community in terms of showing us what's possible, telling us what worked, telling us what didn't. Another resource, if you're interested in exploring, you know, the OT perspective, how that perspective and how that approach to security differs from the enterprise approach, well, this is the difference that I document in my latest book, Secure Operations Technology. Again, the book is not about Waterfall. It's not about me. It's about the perspectives, the methodology, and the best practices that I see the world's most secure industrial sites using. They ask different questions. They get different answers. They see security in a different way. These sites, you know, these sites that we work with, these sites do pretty much all of the conventional IT style protect the information security. They do all of that, and they do some extra. They do more because they have physical operations they have to protect. The book is about what these sites do that's different. The book is not about Waterfall, but if you're interested, Waterfall has purchased a big batch of the books and is giving them away for free, again, as a public service. So if you'd like a free copy, just go to the Waterfall website at, you know, at the URL on the bottom there, waterfall-security.com/sec-ot, SEC-OT. A word about Waterfall. We are the OT security company. We've been around for a decade and then some. We are the world's leaders in the industrial use of unidirectional gateways. We're based in Israel. We're installed in pretty much all the industrial sectors, and certainly in all of the industrial critical infrastructure sectors all over the world. We have a whole family of unidirectional industrial security products, a whole family of products that meet a wide range of business needs for safe communications in lots of different kinds of industries. The latest news at Waterfall, by the way, is probably the same as the latest news in probably every one of our businesses here on the webinar. It's the pandemic. A lot of our customers are in critical infrastructure, so they have to keep working even in these difficult times. But with the pandemic, we might see an entire engineering team quarantined. The whole team might not be able to visit the site. Travel restrictions, international travel restrictions mean that experts from our head office in another country, experts from other vendors cannot visit these important sites. And so these very important sites are going to have trouble doing their important maintenance. So it's not surprising that remote access has become a very big deal with these sites. So, for the duration of the emergency at Waterfall, we are making our most popular remote access product available to our customers free of charge. Now, anyone not familiar with the technology might imagine that unidirectional communications just don't permit remote access. They wipe out the whole possibility of remote access. This is not so. Our product suite includes several remote access options. Remote Screen View is our most secure and our most popular remote access product. And the product is free to existing customers who already have the hardware installed. And generally these customers have a lot of spare capacity on the hardware, so activating Remote Screen View is as simple as installing a license keyword. So if you're interested in the world's most secure OT remote access technology, give us a call. If you're not an existing customer, we'll have to get some hardware out to you somehow before you can take advantage of the free license program. So this is my last slide. I just wanted to observe that if we look at our industry, if we pick an industry, pick power generation, pick refining, natural gas distribution, whatever, pick an industry, look at the sites in the industry, generally hundreds or thousands or sometimes even more sites. Discrete manufacturing has a ridiculous number of industrial sites. Pick an industry, look at all of the sites in the industry and look at the strength of security posture in each of these industrial sites. Count how many sites are at each level of strength. I don't know, put 10 levels in there, do a histogram, plot the result. You're going to see some kind of curve. In a random distribution, it's likely to be a bell curve. It's going to be some kind of curve. Sites at the left of the curve are less well protected. Sites at the right of the curve are much better protected. The thing is this. Every day we hear about new attacks. The attack tools keep getting better. They keep getting more capable. Our attackers have a steadily increasing number of targets that they can go after. They've got increasing opportunities to attack us. They've got more powerful tools to come after us with. In this steadily worsening threat environment, what are all of us doing? Every one of us is increasing the strength of our security posture sooner or later, which means that, pretty steadily over time, the entire curve of strength of security posture is shifting to the right. It's shifting in the direction of what are today's most thoroughly secured industrial sites. These are the sites that are practicing the secure operations methodology already, not because we persuaded them to. They were practicing it already. I went and wrote the book to document what they did, to understand what they do and tell the world about what they do. So these are the sites that, where the whole curve is shifting in the direction of the sites that I document in the Black Book. And, all of the security monitoring approaches that I've covered today on this webinar, the safe OT security monitoring, this stuff is all in the Black Book, most of it in Chapter 6, and there's a lot of other stuff in there as well. What the world's most secure sites are doing today is what all of us are going to be doing in the future. The whole curve is shifting in their direction. So, to wrap up, I encourage each of us to learn about what these thoroughly secured sites do. How do they see the world? Learn about this, including all of this safe OT monitoring stuff. Learn what they do, and one by one, start to adopt these practices. Pick and choose the ones that make the most sense for each of our sites to start with. But learn from these leaders in security and start using whatever makes sense for us today. Specifically, start using unidirectional protection for OT security monitoring. This is the new gold standard. This is where a lot of us are going to get our feet wet in the world of these high-end security practices. So that's what I had for you, and I thank you again for your attention. Jessica, do we have any questions in the queue?
Yes, we do. One moment while I pull that up. So we do have some questions ready for the Q&A. However, if anyone has a question for our presenter, please enter it into the questions window now. Our first question is, can you address how this product would work within an historian installed in a DMZ?
Yes, absolutely. So, a DMZ, demilitarized zone, is a network between networks. So often what we'll see is the industrial control network, there will be a DMZ, and there will be an enterprise, the IT network in a plant. And there'll be firewalls, between them, so that you've got control network, firewall, DMZ, firewall, IT network. And, best practice is that no TCP connection goes from the industrial network through 2 layers of firewalls. So no TCP connection goes from the industrial network straight out to IT, or worse, straight out to the internet. It's just not done. TCP connections from the industrial network end in the DMZ. So if we have an OPC server or a historian server that is the focus of IT/OT integration, it's got to be somewhere where both the industrial network can get to it and the enterprise network can get to it. And so you put the historian into the DMZ. Now it can talk with one hop of TCP connection through a firewall into the industrial network. It can talk to the enterprise network with a different TCP connection, a different hop, a different protocol. And so the question is, how does this technology fit in there? Well, it depends on how much of it you're using. So let's say we've decided that the DMZ, because it's the in-between network, because it's the network that is the boundary between the vital control network and the business vital enterprise network, we want to monitor that network really closely. It's not just a historian that's in there. It's, there's antivirus servers in there. There's anything in there that needs sort of connectivity on both sides. If what we're doing is monitoring that very important network, what we need to do is configure a mirror port on that network into our OT intrusion detection system. Deploy the IDS on the enterprise network, throw the waterfall for IDS in between, and now we can monitor the DMZ. No change to the existing network design, no new connections into the DMZ, no new remote access points. Our existing security posture is unchanged, and we have silently, transparently, safely added monitoring. Now, if you want to go further, if you want to say, I need to reach deeper into the networks, I need to collect, syslog, I need to collect, I don't know, other stuff from deep in the network. Again, you can put a gateway there in parallel with the existing path, saying, pull whatever you need, and don't introduce new communication paths, new ways to send anything into the network. Or, what most people do is they bite the bullet and say, the whole firewall thing is just too weak for me. Steal a password and you're in, find a vulnerability and you're in. And they just replace one of the firewalls around the DMZ with a gateway outright. They might replace the firewall between the DMZ and the IT network, in which case you're replicating the historian out. So you'll need another historian deployed on the IT network, which is a very common design. You'll have an enterprise historian with all the data from all the plants, and you'll have the plant historian in the DMZ. Or you'll deploy the gateway sort of on the bottom end of the design, which is between the DMZ and the industrial network. Now you replicate OPC and other stuff into the historian. Either way, you've introduced a layer of unidirectional protection. And the most common place for the layer is either, in a sense, the top of the DMZ network or the bottom of the DMZ network. One of those firewalls is replaced with a gateway, whichever one is, in a sense, the most convenient. Both designs protect operations. So that was a long answer. I hope that answered the question.
Great, thank you. Next question is, how do acknowledgements from TCP IP through an unidirectional gateway, does this only work with UDP traffic?
That's a very good question, and this is a question we often get from people who are very familiar with TCP networking, with IP networking, and with IP firewalls. And the answer is simple. The answer is that's not needed, and that's the answer because fundamentally, what is a firewall? Intrinsically, what's a firewall? Well, let me back up for a second. We're talking internet protocol. What's the internet? There's really only three things in the internet. There's hosts, there's routers, and there's the connections between them. Hosts are where messages originate and end. And this is a grossly oversimplified, but in principle, hosts are the endpoints of communications. The links obviously are what the communications go through, and the routers figure out where do the messages go, so I can get from one side of the internet or one side of the corporate network to the other. So fundamentally, routers forward messages. They get messages and they decide where to send them. They forward network traffic. Firewalls. What's a firewall? A firewall intrinsically is a router. Firewalls forward network traffic. They're a router with an extra function, and the extra function looks at every one of the messages and says, is this message allowed? If it's allowed, it lets the message through. It hands it to the router, who figures out where it's going and sends it down the next link. If it's not allowed, usually it just drops the message. Unidirectional gateways are not routers. They never forward traffic from one network to another. They are endpoints of communication. There's a host on the inside, the industrial side of the unidirectional gateway. That host is the endpoint for communications. It does normal two-way TCP connections to whatever it wants, whatever it needs to in the industrial side, and gathers data. We turn the data, none of the messages. We send queries to the historian, we get answers back. We get the data out of the answers, we push the data through the weird one-way hardware, and on the other side, we connect to another historian, and we insert the data into the historian. The question packets are not the same as the insert packets. It's a completely different conversation, different content, different encryption, different sequence numbers, different everything. They're different conversations. And so we don't, the question, how do we acknowledge packets? How does a laptop acknowledge packets? It's an endpoint of communications. It's a host, not a router. How does it acknowledge packets? Well, the packets come in and it acknowledges them. We send a message to the historian saying, insert this data. The historian sends us back a message saying, yep, I did that. We acknowledge the message. It's normal communication. So it's a tricky concept. We get this question a lot. I hope that answered it. I don't know. It's I really should have a diagram for this or something, because like I said, it is a question we get a lot.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next question is, so the data pushed out from a mirror port basically enables SOC people to detect and replicate a problem and work on it outside of the live data activity, but the mirror port doesn't really protect intrusion. Are OT people aware of this scenario? Is it common for this to be a blind spot?
It's very common for this to be a blind spot. Most OT people don't use the mirror port on their switches. They don't even know that the port's there. And so when someone says, hey, I got a mirror port, it'll give me a copy of your stuff. It's just a copy. Okay, I'm not sending any questions into the network. You're not giving me answers. It's just a copy. You won't even know it's there. They go, good. When they discover what they've done in terms of introducing a new attack path, they tend to be very unhappy. So this is something that we as enterprise security leaders really should be bringing to the table and saying, look, here's how it works. Let's look at your switches. Some of them have software protection, some of them don't. We should really do something about this. If we come in and say we're going to use a mirror port, we're going to watch the traffic only, and we're putting a unidirectional gateway in, it's physically impossible to send anything back. The engineers go, send stuff back? What's a mirror port? We explain it all. They go, okay, that presents minimal risk. They still do an investigation. Some of these engineering teams really are very thorough. They're going to ask the question, so we've enabled a function on our switch that we didn't enable before. Is the software in the switch going to be able to handle this function? Are we going to be slowing down our switches? They're going to ask a lot of these questions. They're going to dig into it. If they discover these issues on their own, we have lost an opportunity to build trust. If we go in there and lay the issues on the table and say, look, we've used these switches at 73 sites before, the version of software you're running is not a problem for us. It's robust enough. Oh, okay. You've brought that issue to their attention. They can validate that. And, it's hardware enforced one way, nothing gets back. Okay, you lay these all on the table, they do their investigation and come back and say, we were right, bang, 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 every one of the times. You've developed a degree of confidence. You've got a good working relationship. You've developed a solid working relationship. Now you can go and do more interesting things in the security space together. It's important to develop that trust. So yeah, often engineering is not aware of this, and what's most effective, in my opinion, is when the people who are aware of it bring it to the table, lay it on the table, get it solved with unidirectional technology, and move on to the next bigger problem.
Great, thank you. Next question is, what is the difference in services between a data diode and a Waterfall unidirectional security gateway?
That's a good question. If you Google data diode, and I did this, I do this every once in a while just for giggles. Google data diode and count how many vendors come up. How many people are selling data diodes in the world? The concept of a data diode is unidirectional. The space is full of all sorts of stuff, from horrible stuff that's crap to stuff that has the same hardware design as our unidirectional hardware, in the sense that it's got a fiber optic transmitter or a short piece of fiber, a fiber optic receiver. That's the gold design for data diodes. But if you Google them, it's a ridiculous number of vendors. I counted like 60 odd in the first 15 pages of Google the last time I did this. Who are these vendors? They are all providing technology to their local military, and sometimes their local governments. What are they using the technology for? They're using it to send stuff into classified networks. What's the hardware look like? It's it's not industrial form factor, but it's one way. Really, so that sounds very similar. No, but the difference is the software. There are some differences in the hardware, but the big difference is in the software. And if I may, the reason there's all of these vendors is because every local military wants to buy from a locally certified supply chain. So they all have local vendors with tiny markets. They have their military as a market. That's it. So how much product do they have? How much off-the-shelf capability? Well, they've only got one customer. Everybody else wants to buy from their local diode vendor. So they tend to be, hardware-ish with minimal or no software at all. So you go to one of these vendors and you say, I would like to replicate a Pi historian, what's their answer going to be? It's going to be, sure, that will be $500,000 in custom engineering. Because that's what the military does. They don't buy a hammer. They buy a device for pounding nails with these specifications. And you say, well, my hammer meets most of them. Not good enough. I need all of them met. So custom engineering is done a lot. In the industrial space, nobody wants custom engineering. You Google unidirectional gateway and you will find a handful, literally a handful of vendors who have any kind of credible industrial server replication software. This is why NIST, in their 882 report, the industrial control system advice they give, you can download it, NIST 882, get the most recent version 2. They define a unidirectional gateway as one-way hardware, and they, I think, even mentioned data diode, one-way hardware like a data diode with software that replicates servers, because that's the key to plug and play deployment of these things in industrial environments. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Next question is, how would this product work with remote access requirements of OT system?
Well, that's a good question. As I said, a lot of people imagine that remote access is ruled out by the technology, but it's not. And I'm working on a new white paper to clarify this. I did have a whole webinar on this, a month ago. But basically, there's many ways to do remote access. So let me give you two examples that I've already mentioned, and just go a little deeper. When we're talking about replicating servers, and we have a replica server on the enterprise network, a replica historian, that gives us access to the data, that access can be as remote as you want. You can be sending that historian data out to the cloud to do big data analysis, into the Amazon cloud, into the internet, into cell phone apps if you want. Nothing gets back into operations. The unidirectional provides remote access to data without providing remote access to systems. I mentioned remote screen view. What is remote screen view? It's used routinely when we have third parties who need access to our systems, but we don't know who the third parties are. The classic example is turbine vendors. If you buy a steam turbine, $300 million investment, you get a warranty on it only if the vendor can continuously monitor the turbine. So that's access to data, that's fine. Unidirectional gateway out, nothing back in. But every couple of months, the vendor is monitoring for anomalies. Okay, wear is the enemy of all rotating equipment. Vibration is the symptom of wear. They're monitoring vibration. When they see a vibration building up, they say, we got a problem here. We need to adjust the turbine, because these things are infinitely adjustable to deal with the problem. So they book, they call up the site, they say, I need an hour on Thursday on unit number 3. They book the time. The site calls them, presses the button on remote screen view, and starts sending pictures of the screen of the turbine vibration workstation out. The vendor can see the screen. It's basically a video feed. They can see like a unidirectional video feed. They're on the phone to the site. The vendor cannot move the mouse. There's physically no way to get that signal back into the industrial site, but the people on the inside, the engineers, can move the mouse. They get instructions from the vendor. They ask the vendor, what does that mean? Why am I doing that? They understand the instruction, because it's their responsibility to keep the machine running. They move the mouse, they do things when they understand what they're being asked to do and when they're convinced that it's safe. So this is, and the beauty of this is that the vendor's personnel, they might have tens or hundreds of people in their cloud remote operations center. All of these people don't have to be through our background checks. They don't have to be through our security training program, through our safety training program. They don't have to be insiders, because an insider is responsible for interpreting their instructions and deciding if it's safe to apply them. So that's a second kind of remote access. There's another couple of kinds of remote access. The thing is, with a firewall, to a man with a hammer, all the world's a nail. To a man with a firewall, all questions are answered by whack, open another TCP port. Oh, and encrypt it. I need antivirus, whack, open a port. I need remote access, whack, whack. That's 2 ports, one for the VPN and one for remote desktop. The Waterfall product line, our philosophy is understand the specific business need. If I have insiders who need access to the system, that's a different need than outsiders who I don't trust, who need access to the system. We produce the most specific solution for every business need. That's why you see such a variety of solutions in our product suite. So, long answer. I hope that worked.
All right, thank you very much. And that's all the time that we do have for today. Thank you to our speaker, Andrew, for your great presentation, and to Waterfall Security for sponsoring this webcast, which helps brings this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.